For 6 years, Margaret Roberts desperately searched for her missing son, walking through every street, every shelter, every hospital in Seattle, Washington. In September 2023, a phone call from a psychiatric hospital in Portland would change her life forever. Michael had been found, but in a state that defied all comprehension. Completely rigid, muscles petrified in a fixed position, victim of a neurological condition so rare that it affects only 1 in 2 million people. Fibrodysplasia Ossificans Progressiva had literally transformed her son into a living human statue. If you are fascinated by real medical mysteries and missing person cases with impossible scientific twists, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell to discover how a mother found her son after he developed Stone Man syndrome. Today, we will dive into the complete story of Michael Roberts, a 28-year-old young man whose normal life was interrupted by devastating neurological symptoms that culminated in a mysterious disappearance. You will discover how one of the planet's rarest conditions can explain disappearances that seem supernatural, and how a mother's love can overcome even the most desperate diagnoses of modern medicine. Prepare yourself for a journey that combines missing person mystery with cutting-edge medical science, revealing how some syndromes can completely transform human bone and muscle structure. This is the true story of Michael Roberts and how his mother never gave up, even when doctors said there was no more hope. Michael Roberts was 28 years old when he mysteriously disappeared in June 2017, leaving behind a prosperous life as a software engineer in Seattle, Washington. At 6 feet 1 inch tall and with the athletic build of someone who had practiced swimming since adolescence, Michael possessed dark blonde hair and blue eyes that, according to his mother Margaret, always reflected a curious intelligence about how things worked. Born in Seattle in 1989, Michael was the only child of Margaret Roberts, a 61-year-old retired librarian, and James Roberts, a mathematics professor who had died of cancer in 2015. The loss of his father had brought mother and son even closer together, who spoke daily by phone and had dinner together every Sunday at the family home in Queen Anne. Michael was meticulous in everything he did. Since childhood, Margaret would recall, he organized his toys by color and size, always finished his homework before playing. When he grew up, that precision made him an exceptional engineer, but it also made him notice when something in his body wasn't functioning normally. Graduated in software engineering from the University of Washington in 2012, Michael had worked at Microsoft since 2014, specializing in artificial intelligence systems development. He was recognized by colleagues as a natural problem solver, capable of identifying complex errors that other programmers couldn't find. Michael had an extraordinary mind for patterns, observed Dr. Sarah Chen, his supervisor at Microsoft. He could see connections in codes that escaped most people, but in the last months before the disappearance, we noticed he was having concentration difficulties and was complaining of constant physical pain. Professionally, Michael was at the peak of his career. He had received a promotion to senior software engineer in January 2017 and led a team of 5 developers on a revolutionary machine learning project. His annual salary of $145,000 allowed him to live comfortably in a modern apartment in Capitol Hill. Personally, Michael was known for his gentle nature and dry sense of humor. He had been dating Amanda Foster, a 26-year-old nurse, for 3 years. Amanda described Michael as incredibly caring, but a perfectionist to the extreme, especially when it came to his health and physical well-being. Michael was always hyper-conscious about his body, Amanda would recall to investigators. He had regular medical checkups, maintained strict diets, exercised religiously. That's why it was so alarming when he started having physical symptoms that doctors couldn't explain. From March 2017, Michael had begun experiencing worrying physical symptoms that were initially diagnosed as work-related stress. He complained of progressive stiffness in joints, particularly in his neck and shoulders, and intense pain that worsened gradually each week. He visited 4 different doctors, Margaret would explain. They all said it was muscle tension, maybe fibromyalgia. They prescribed muscle relaxants and physical therapy, but nothing worked. Actually, Michael seemed to be getting stiffer every day. What neither Michael nor his family knew was that he was developing Fibrodysplasia Ossificans Progressiva, AFOP, an extremely rare genetic condition where the body's tissue repair system malfunctions, causing muscles, tendons, and ligaments to be gradually replaced by bone. Literally, Michael was transforming into a human statue, and none of the doctors he consulted recognized the signs of the syndrome. FOP is so rare that many doctors have never seen a case, would later explain Dr. Patricia Martinez, a specialist in orphan diseases from Johns Hopkins. The initial symptoms, stiffness, joint pain, can be easily confused with much more common conditions. Unfortunately, late diagnosis means that preventive treatments cannot be implemented. In the 2 months prior to his disappearance, Michael had become progressively more isolated. He began missing work with increasing frequency, canceled social activities, and spent most of his time at home trying to deal with physical pain he described as bones growing where they shouldn't grow. He knew something was terribly wrong, Amanda would observe. Michael was a person who always had answers, but this time he was completely lost. He said he felt like his own body was becoming his prison. Margaret noticed alarming changes in Michael's behavior during his Sunday visits. He was moving increasingly stiffly, like a robot, she would recall. And he had developed an obsession with researching rare medical conditions online. He spent hours reading about diseases I had never heard of. The last conversation Margaret had with Michael was on the morning of June 18, 2017. He called at 8:30 a.m. as he did every morning, but his voice sounded different, slower, more labored. "Mom, if something happens to me, I want you to know I love you," he said. "And if I disappear for a while, don't stop looking for me. Promise?" Margaret thought Michael was being dramatic due to chronic pain, but promised, as she always did. "Of course, dear. But are you okay? Do you want me to come over?" "No, I'm going to work. Just, you promised, right? Never stop looking." Those were the last words Margaret Roberts would hear from her son for 6 long years. What no one knew at that moment was that Michael Roberts was entering the final stage of a medical condition that would literally transform him into a living statue, and that his eventual discovery would reveal one of the most extraordinary cases of medical survival ever documented. His journey over the next 6 years would challenge everything medicine knew about the limits of human endurance. Monday, June 19, 2017, should have been a normal day for Michael Roberts, but when he didn't show up for work at Microsoft for the 3rd time that week, his supervisor, Dr. Sarah Chen, decided to personally check on his well-being. Michael never missed work without notice, especially considering his leadership position on a critical project with tight deadlines. Michael was obsessively punctual, Dr. Chen would recall to investigators. In 3 years working with me, he had never missed work without prior communication. When he didn't show up for the 9 a.m. meeting, I immediately knew something was wrong. At 11:30 a.m., Dr. Chen called Michael's apartment in Capitol Hill, but the calls went straight to voicemail. Concerned, she contacted Amanda Foster, who she had listed as an emergency contact in the company files. Amanda confirmed that she hadn't spoken to Michael since the previous evening, when he had canceled their dinner plans, claiming unbearable pain in his shoulders and neck. Michael had been progressively worse in recent weeks, Amanda would explain. The stiffness in his muscles was affecting his ability to drive, to dress, even to sleep comfortably. He was desperate for medical answers, but every specialist he consulted offered different diagnoses and ineffective treatments. At 2:30 p.m., Amanda used her key to enter Michael's apartment. What she found deeply disturbed her. The apartment was in perfect order, as if Michael had meticulously organized everything before leaving. His wallet, car keys, and cell phone were carefully arranged on the entrance table, along with a handwritten note that simply said, "If something happens, look for Dr. Richard Hayes, Johns Hopkins, FOP." The note didn't make sense to me at the time, Amanda would recall. Michael had always been meticulous, but this seemed like he was preparing for something. And what did FOP mean? I had never heard that acronym. More disturbing was the state of Michael's bedroom. His bed was made, but there were strange indentations in the mattress that suggested someone had remained in the same position for hours. Amanda also noticed that several clothes were scattered on the closet floor, as if Michael had tried to dress but abandoned the effort due to pain or stiffness. Amanda immediately contacted Margaret Roberts, who arrived at the apartment at 4 p.m., accompanied by two family friends. As soon as I saw the note, I knew Michael had discovered something about his condition, Margaret would explain. He had been researching obsessively for months. Maybe he finally found an answer, but it scared him. The Seattle Police Department was contacted at 5:45 p.m. when an informal search for Michael at local hospitals, urgent care clinics, and places he frequented produced no results. Detective Lisa Chen was assigned to the case, initially treating it as a possible voluntary disappearance due to stress related to health problems. Cases of adults who disappear voluntarily due to undiagnosed medical problems are more common than the public realizes, Detective Chen would explain. People desperate for answers sometimes take drastic measures, including traveling to specialized medical centers without informing family or friends. The initial investigation focused on the enigmatic note left by Michael. Dr. Richard Hayes from Johns Hopkins was contacted, confirming that he was indeed one of the world's leading specialists in Fibrodysplasia Ossificans Progressiva, FOP. However, Dr. Hayes had no record of any communication with Michael Roberts and had never heard his name. FOP is such a rare condition that we keep records of all diagnosed patients globally, Dr. Hayes explained during a phone call with Detective Chen. Michael Roberts is not in our database, but based on the description of symptoms you provided, he definitely should be examined by our team as quickly as possible. The discovery that Michael had possibly self-diagnosed an extremely rare medical condition completely changed the direction of the investigation. Detective Chen expanded the search to include hospitals, specialized clinics, and medical research centers within a 500-mile radius of Seattle. If Michael really had FOP and had realized it, he could have panicked and sought treatment anywhere he thought could help, Detective Chen theorized. People with rare conditions sometimes travel enormous distances seeking specialists. During the first week of searching, security cameras from Michael's building revealed crucial information. He had left his apartment at 6:30 a.m. on the morning of June 19th, walking in a visibly stiff manner and carrying a small backpack. More importantly, the footage showed that Michael wasn't using his car. He had left on foot. The stiffness in his walk was alarming, observed Dr. Patricia Martinez after reviewing the footage. Based on how he was moving, I would estimate that ossification had already progressed significantly. Michael was probably in considerable pain and discomfort. Analysis of Michael's computer revealed a disturbing browsing history. In the 2 months prior to his disappearance, he had extensively researched FOP, cases of assisted euthanasia, and unregulated experimental clinics. He had also visited online forums where patients with terminal diseases discussed exit options. Michael was clearly in despair, Margaret would later admit. If I had known how dark his research was getting, I would have intervened immediately. He had always been a rational person, but chronic pain and lack of diagnosis can push anyone to the edge. The official investigation of Michael Roberts intensified during July 2017, when it became clear that he hadn't simply traveled in search of medical treatment. Detective Lisa Chen coordinated a search operation involving multiple agencies, initially focusing on the theory that Michael had suffered an acute medical episode related to his progressive condition. FAP can cause sudden ossification episodes, especially when the patient suffers trauma or extreme stress, explained Dr. Richard Hayes during a phone consultation. If Michael experienced a severe outbreak while away from home, he could have become literally and physically unable to move or ask for help. The physical search concentrated on parks, hiking trails, and natural areas where Michael was known to walk when stressed. Search and rescue teams scoured Discovery Park, Kerry Park, and the shores of Puget Sound, looking for signs that Michael might have collapsed due to his condition. Theoretically, if Michael experienced sudden and severe ossification, he could have become physically frozen in whatever position he was in when it happened, Dr. Hayes explained grimly. In rare cases, FOP patients can become completely immobilized in a matter of hours. Hospital investigations revealed an intriguing clue. Michael had visited the emergency room at the University of Washington Medical Center at 11:45 p.m. on June 18th, just hours before his disappearance. Medical records showed that he had sought treatment for severe muscle pain and progressive stiffness, but had left against medical advice after 2 hours of waiting. Michael was clearly in panic that night, revealed Dr. Jennifer Wong, who had been on duty. He described symptoms consistent with FOP, but our emergency team didn't recognize the signs. We offered painkillers and recommended follow-up with a rheumatologist, but he said there wasn't time and left abruptly. More disturbing was the discovery that Michael had made a 47-minute call to a number in Oregon in the early morning hours of June 19th, shortly before leaving his apartment. Investigation revealed that the EE number belonged to Northwest Compassionate Care, an organization that allegedly offered alternative care for terminal patients. The organization operated in a legal gray area, Detective Chen would explain. They offered end-of-life counseling and unconventional palliative care. But there were suspicions they facilitated illegal assisted death. When we tried to contact them, we discovered they had abruptly closed operations in July 2017. Investigation of Northwest. Compassionate Care revealed that they maintained a transition house on an isolated rural property in Oregon, approximately 200 miles south of Seattle. Local records showed that the property had been sold in August 2017, just 2 months after Michael's disappearance. We began to suspect that Michael might have sought out this organization for assistance with his progressive condition, Detective Chen would later admit. If he believed FOP would transform him into a living statue, he may have taken desperate measures. During August and September 2017, investigators conducted extensive searches of the rural property in Oregon, but found only abandoned structures and evidence that the site had been systematically cleaned. Whoever operated there knew how to erase tracks, observed Detective Marcus Webb, who led the search team in Oregon. Margaret Roberts refused to accept theories that Michael had sought assisted death. "My son was a fighter," she insisted. "Yes, he was desperate, but Michael would never give up. He was looking for a cure, not death. I'm certain of that." To keep the investigation active, Margaret organized social media campaigns, distributed more than 10,000 flyers, and offered a $50,000 reward for information about Michael. Her Find Michael Roberts campaign gained national attention, especially in the medical community specialized in rare diseases. Margaret's dedication was inspiring, Dr. Hayes would observe. She became an expert on FOP almost overnight, networking with researchers worldwide and attending medical conferences. She was determined to understand Michael's condition and find a way to help him. In December 2017, 6 months after the disappearance, the case was transferred to cold case status, but Margaret continued her private search. She had visited more than 200 medical facilities in 12 states, always carrying photographs of Michael and detailed information about FOP. Margaret never gave up, Detective Chen would observe years later. Even when the evidence went completely cold, she continued searching. Her theory was that Michael was alive somewhere, possibly incapacitated by his condition, but still fighting. As it would turn out, she was more right than anyone imagined. What no one knew during those first months of searching was that Michael Roberts had indeed found Northwest Compassionate Care, but not for the purposes investigators suspected. Instead, he had become an involuntary patient in a situation that would test the limits of human endurance and reveal one of the most extraordinary cases of medical survival ever documented. What happened to Michael Roberts during the 6 years between his disappearance in June 2017 and his eventual discovery in September 2023 would only be fully understood through a medical and criminal investigation that would reveal one of the most extraordinary and disturbing cases of medical negligence and abandonment ever documented in the United States. Based on evidence later discovered, Michael had indeed contacted Northwest Compassionate Care in the early morning hours of his disappearance, but not seeking assisted death as investigators initially suspected. Instead, desperate for treatment for his progressive condition, he had been lured by promises of experimental therapies, or FOP, that the organization claimed to offer. Northwest Compassionate Care was essentially a predatory operation that exploited terminal patients and their families, would later reveal Agent Patricia Rodriguez of the FBI. They charged exorbitant fees for unapproved treatments, and when patients could no longer pay or became too sick to treat, they simply abandoned them. Michael had arrived at the rural facility in Oregon on the afternoon of June 19, 2017, still able to walk, although with increasing difficulty due to the progression of his FOP. Records later discovered showed that he had paid $15,000, practically all his savings, for an experimental protocol that promised to reverse progressive ossification. What they were doing was criminal, Dr. Richard Hayes would explain after reviewing recovered documentation. Not only were the treatments completely ineffective and unscientific, but they could actually accelerate FOP progression through repeated trauma to affected muscles. During the first 2 months at the facility, Michael maintained some mobility, although limited. Phone records later discovered showed that he had tried to contact Margaret several times in July, but his calls were blocked by the organization's staff, who allegedly told him that external contact would interfere with his treatment. Michael was essentially being held against his will, Agent Rodriguez would conclude. When he realized the treatments weren't working and wanted to leave the facility, he discovered that his condition had deteriorated to the point where he could no longer move independently. In September 2017, Northwest Compassionate Care abruptly ceased operations after investigation by Oregon health authorities. However, instead of transferring Michael to appropriate medical care, the staff simply abandoned the facility, leaving him alone in a remote building with minimal supplies. It's inconceivable that they left a patient in Michael's condition completely alone, Dr. Patricia Martinez would observe with obvious anger. FOP patients require specific care to prevent complications. Abandoning him was essentially a death sentence. What happened next defied medical explanation. Michael, unable to move due to advanced ossification, but still conscious and alert, somehow managed to survive alone for nearly 4 years in the abandoned facility. When eventually discovered, investigators found evidence that he had survived by drinking rainwater that collected in containers and eating small amounts of preserved food he found in the facility. Michael's survival was medically miraculous, Dr. Hayes would explain. Advanced stage FOP patients typically require constant medical care. The fact that he survived alone for years, in essentially a vegetative but conscious state, challenged everything we understood about the condition. Most remarkably, Michael's body had continued ossifying during these years, but in a pattern that medical science had never seen before. Instead of random ossification typical of FOP, his muscles and ligaments had essentially frozen him in a single position, creating what appeared to be a human statue. The rigidity was complete, Dr. Martinez would describe after examining Michael years later. Every muscle group had ossified simultaneously, creating a solid bone matrix that maintained him in a fixed position. He was literally a living statue, conscious inside but unable to move a single muscle. During this period, Michael's mental state remained largely intact, trapped inside a body that had become his prison. Later, psychological evaluations revealed that he had developed extraordinary mental coping mechanisms, essentially meditating for hours to deal with isolation and physical helplessness. Michael told us he had created elaborate mental worlds to escape, revealed Dr. Sarah Kim, neuropsychologist. He traveled mentally to places he remembered, had conversations with people from his past. It was a form of dissociation that probably saved his sanity. Meanwhile, Margaret Roberts had never stopped searching. During 2020 through 2022, she had expanded her search to include abandoned medical facilities, decommissioned hospitals, and rural properties where Michael might have been taken. Her persistence finally paid off when she contacted a property management company in Oregon responsible for maintaining abandoned buildings. Margaret was relentless, recalled Jake Thompson, property manager. She visited our offices multiple times, always asking about empty medical facilities. When we mentioned a property in rural Oregon we'd been trying to sell for years, she immediately asked to visit it. The discovery that would change everything happened on the afternoon of September 15, 2023, when Margaret Roberts, accompanied by property manager Jake Thompson and local sheriff's deputies, entered an abandoned building that once housed a Northwest Compassionate Care facility. What they found inside would become one of the most shocking cases of patient abandonment ever documented. Initially, I thought it was some kind of sculpture or art installation, Deputy Maria Santos recalled. There was a figure sitting in a chair near a window, completely motionless. It looked made of stone. Only when Margaret gasped and said, "Michael," did we realize we were looking at a living human being. Michael Roberts, then 34 years old, was sitting in a wooden chair facing a window overlooking a forest. His body was completely rigid, ossified in a position he had apparently maintained for years. His eyes were open and alert, tracking movement, but he was unable to speak or move any part of his body. Seeing him was simultaneously heartbreaking and miraculous. Margaret would later describe through tears. My son was alive, conscious, aware, but trapped inside a body that had become his prison. When our eyes met, I saw recognition there. He knew who I was. Emergency medical teams were immediately called to the scene. Paramedics initially struggled to understand how to safely transport Michael, whose body had literally fused into his sitting position. Moving him required careful coordination to avoid fracturing the ossified tissue that now composed most of his muscle groups. I'd never seen anything like it in 20 years of emergency medicine, said Dr. Jennifer Wong, who led the emergency response team. Michael's condition was unique even among FOP cases. The ossification pattern was unlike anything documented in medical literature. Transport to Portland General Hospital required a specially modified ambulance and a team of orthopedic specialists. During the 2-hour journey, Michael remained conscious and responsive to questions, communicating through eye movements and subtle facial expressions. Some muscles in his face had somehow remained flexible. Michael was able to confirm his identity and indicate yes/no answers to basic questions, Dr. Wong reported. His mental faculties seemed intact, which was extraordinary considering the trauma he had endured. Initial medical evaluation revealed that the extent of Michael's ossification was unprecedented. X-rays showed that approximately 80% of his skeletal muscle tissue had been replaced by bone, creating an internal skeleton that held him in permanent position. However, vital organs remained functional, and his brain showed no signs of damage. Michael's case represented a new variant of FOP that medical science hadn't seen before. Dr. Richard Hayes explained after flying to Portland to examine Michael personally. The ossification pattern was so complete that it essentially created an exoskeleton around his existing bones. He was alive inside a cage made of his own body. More shocking was the discovery that Michael had been conscious and aware during the entire 6-year period of abandonment. Psychiatric evaluation revealed that he had detailed memories of each day, including the periods when the facility staff abandoned him and the subsequent years of struggling to survive alone. Michael described every detail of his experience, Dr. Sarah Kim revealed during psychiatric evaluation. He remembered the facility closing, the staff leaving, the subsequent years, struggling to survive. The psychological trauma was immense, but somehow he had found ways to cope. Investigation of Northwest Compassionate Care revealed the full extent of criminal negligence. The FBI discovered that the organization had collected more than $2 million from desperate patients and families before abandoning operations when pressure became too intense. 5 individuals were eventually charged with fraud, negligent homicide, and patient abandonment. What happened to Michael was essentially torture, Agent Rodriguez declared during a press conference. These people took advantage of terminally ill patients, took their money, provided false treatments, and then abandoned them to die. It's a level of cruelty that's difficult to comprehend. For Margaret Roberts, finding Michael alive after 6 years of searching was both vindication and the beginning of a new challenge. Medical experts weren't sure if any treatment could reverse the ossification or improve Michael's quality of life. At least I have my son back, Margaret said during an emotional press conference. He's alive, he's aware, and we're together again. We'll face whatever comes next as a family. Medical teams at Portland General Hospital began developing unprecedented treatment protocols for Michael's condition. While reversal of ossification was considered impossible, doctors hoped to improve his comfort and potentially restore some basic functions. Michael's case is teaching us Things about FOP we never knew before, Dr. Hayes observed. His survival against impossible odds is rewriting what we thought we understood about human endurance and the potential for adaptation even in the most extreme circumstances. For Michael Roberts, the discovery meant transitioning from 6 years of isolation to suddenly being surrounded by medical teams, media attention, and overwhelming emotions of reunion with his family. The recovery journey, both physical and psychological, was just beginning. The case of Michael Roberts forced the global medical community to reconsider its understanding of Fibrodysplasia Ossificans Progressiva and established new protocols for cases of patient abandonment. Dr. Richard Hayes, working with an international team of specialists, documented that Michael had developed an extremely rare variant of FOP that affected his muscular system more uniformly and completely than any previously recorded case. Michael's ossification occurred in a pattern that created structural stability instead of random deformity, Dr. Hayes explained in a study published in the New England Journal of Medicine. This organized petrification allowed him to maintain vital functions while becoming completely immobilized, a phenomenon we had never observed. Michael's treatment focused on pain management, complication prevention, and experimental attempts to restore some facial mobility. While complete reversal of ossification was impossible, innovative therapies allowed him to recover some speech capacity and limited facial expression. Michael can now communicate verbally, although with difficulty, Dr. Patricia Martinez reported after 6 months of intensive treatment. His first words to Margaret were, "Thank you for never giving up." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. The criminal investigation resulted in convictions of 5 individuals associated with Northwest Compassionate Care. The case led to significant reforms in the regulation of alternative care facilities and established new protocols for protecting vulnerable patients. The organization was a predatory scheme targeting desperate families, Agent Patricia Rodriguez explained during the trial. They promised medical miracles for exorbitant prices, provided inadequate care, and abandoned patients when they became inconvenient. It's one of the cruelest forms of medical fraud I've ever investigated. For Margaret Roberts, finding Michael transformed years of despair into a new mission, advocating for patients with rare diseases and their families. She established the Michael Roberts Foundation to fund FOP research and support families facing similar situations. Michael survived the impossible, Margaret reflects today. His story proves that love and determination can overcome even the most desperate circumstances. As long as there's life, there's hope. Never give up searching for your loved ones. Michael's recovery process has been gradual but encouraging. Specialized physical therapists developed techniques to maintain flexibility in the few muscles that still respond, while occupational therapists created adaptive devices that allow more effective communication. Michael developed extraordinary mental strength during his years of isolation, observed Dr. Sarah Kim, the neuropsychologist who monitors his progress. His ability to maintain hope and mental sanity in impossible circumstances is truly inspiring. He has become an example of human resilience. Today, Michael lives in a specialized facility in Portland, surrounded by constant medical care and visited daily by Margaret. While his body remains largely immobilized, his mind remains sharp, and he works with doctors to develop new treatments for FOP. "I want my experience to help other patients and families," Michael communicated through his assisted speech device. "If my story can prevent other people from going through what I went through, then it was worth it. No one should be abandoned like I was." Medical research resulting from Michael's case has already led to significant advances in understanding FOP. His unique variant of the condition provided valuable insights into how progressive ossification functions at the cellular level, potentially paving the way for new preventive treatments. Dr. Hayes established a research program dedicated specifically to studying Michael's variant, with funding from the Michael Roberts Foundation and several international medical organizations. Michael's sacrifice, though involuntary, is contributing to our understanding of this devastating condition, Dr. Hayes explained. The case also resulted in significant legislative changes. The Michael Roberts Patient Protection Act was passed in Oregon in 2024, establishing stricter oversight of alternative care facilities and mandatory protocols for reporting patient abandonment. For the medical community, Michael Roberts' case serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of vigilance in protecting vulnerable patients. We must never allow predators to exploit people desperate for cures, observed Dr. Martinez. The case of Michael Roberts not only reunited a devastated family, but revolutionized medical understanding of one of the world's rarest conditions, established protection protocols for vulnerable patients, and proved that even in the most impossible circumstances, human endurance and family love can prevail. 6 years after mysteriously disappearing, Michael Roberts finally came home, physically transformed, but with unshakable spirit and a story that will continue inspiring doctors, researchers, and families around the world for generations.